The sea was always a predictable thing for Darius Finn. For the past decade, he'd spent more time on the water than on land, sailing the treacherous trade routes and dodging the ever-watchful eyes of the authorities. The dark, endless horizon was his home, the saltwater breeze his constant companion. No matter how much the world changed, the sea remained the same, and that consistency gave him a certain kind of peace. After all, a man could only count on so many things in this unpredictable world, and the sea was at the top of that list. Darius was a smuggler, and in his world, predictability was a luxury. The goods he transported, highly valuable artifacts, rare spices, and sometimes less than legal substances, were always in demand. But the thrill was in the challenge, the dance between risk and reward. And though he'd made enemies over the years, he had a knack for keeping one step ahead of trouble. He never stayed too long in one place, always moving, always out of reach. He wasn't proud of his life, but he had learned to accept it. The smuggling business had made him wealthy, yes, but it had also hardened him. He'd learned early on that trust was a currency far rarer than gold. In his line of work, betrayal was inevitable, and if you let your guard down, it was your life on the line. That day, the ship was the Elysium, a vessel he had spent years outfitting to suit his trade. It was fast, with sleek lines and a crew that knew their roles well. He stood at the helm, his eyes scanning the waters ahead, the familiar hum of the ship beneath his feet comforting in its predictability. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow across the waves, but even the beauty of the scene couldn't soften the hard edge of his cynicism. Life had taught him that beauty often hid danger, and the sea, in particular, had a way of swallowing the unwary. But as he turned his gaze toward the distant coastline of the island they were approaching, Darius sensed something was different. There was an unease in the air, a dissonance in the quiet hum of the ship's engines. He couldn't place it at first, but it was there, like a shadow passing just out of sight. "Captain, we've got a problem," came the voice of his first mate, Marco, breaking through his thoughts. Darius turned, his expression a mix of curiosity and annoyance. "What now, Marco?" Marco, a towering figure with a deep scar running across his cheek, pointed to the side of the ship. "There's someone in the hold. They must have snuck on board during the night. A stowaway." The very thought irritated Darius to no end. He'd run a tight ship, his crew disciplined and alert. How had someone managed to slip past them? And why now, when they were so close to the island? "Have you checked it out?" Darius asked, his voice low but firm. Marco shrugged. "We were waiting for you, Captain." Darius's eyes narrowed. "I'll deal with it." He turned sharply, heading down the stairs toward the cargo hold. The hold was dim, the air thick with the scent of salt and old wood. Darius made his way between the crates, the faint creak of the ship's timbers echoing in the silence. He kept his hand near the hilt of his sword, always ready. There were 1,000 reasons someone might stow away on his ship, some harmless, others not so much. He needed to find out which this was before it turned into a problem. At the far end of the hold, he saw a figure crouched near one of the large barrels. It was a woman, her back to him, wearing tattered clothes and a hood that obscured her face. She was silent, still, but there was something about the way she moved that made Darius pause. "Hey," he called out sharply, stepping forward. The woman froze, then slowly turned to face him. Even in the dim light, her eyes struck him immediately, deep, intense, almost unnatural in their vivid green hue. For a moment, Darius forgot to speak, caught off guard by the intensity of her gaze. But he quickly regained his composure, his hand tightening on the sword. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. The woman didn't answer right away. She seemed to study him, her eyes flicking over his form with an unsettling calmness. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, almost like a whisper, but there was a strength to it that belied her frail appearance. "I need your help," she said simply. Darius didn't lower his guard. He'd heard enough lies in his life to recognize them immediately, and this woman's calmness didn't sit right with him. "Help?" You snuck onto my ship and now you want me to help you? What exactly is it you think I can do for you? The woman took a slow step forward, her movements deliberate. I'm not a threat to you, she continued. I just need to get to the island. I'll be gone before you even know I was here. Darius's eyes narrowed. There was something about her tone, the way she spoke with such certainty. The offer seemed too simple, too easy. But in his line of work, nothing was ever that simple. Why should I believe you? Her gaze never wavered, and for a moment, Darius saw something flash in her eyes, something almost ancient. Because, she said, her voice barely above a breath, if you don't, you'll regret it. Darius took a step back, suddenly wary. He had no idea what he was dealing with, but something told him that ignoring her wasn't an option. The tension in the hold thickened, a strange weight hanging between them. Darius's instincts, honed over years of smuggling and surviving under constant threat, screamed at him to throw the woman overboard. She was a liability, a wildcard in an otherwise predictable world. But there was something about her, something in her voice, in the way her gaze met his with unflinching certainty, that unsettled him in a way he couldn't explain. He took a slow step forward, his hand still resting on the hilt of his sword. I don't know who you are, and I don't know what you want, but I don't take kindly to trespassers. The woman, to his surprise, didn't flinch. Instead, she held his gaze, her lips curling into the faintest of smirks. You won't be rid of me that easily. Not yet, anyway. Darius's patience was thinning fast. You'd be wise to explain yourself. Now. The woman hesitated for a moment, then sighed, as if she was weighing the decision to speak. I'm not just anyone, she said quietly. I'm not just some runaway or thief looking for a ride. You wouldn't have taken me aboard if you knew who I was. Darius raised an eyebrow. And who exactly are you? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she seemed to contemplate the question as if trying to gauge how much to reveal. Finally, her eyes softened, the intensity shifting into something more calculating. I'm not from this world. Darius blinked, his mouth dry. He had heard all kinds of wild stories in his time. Pirates telling tales of sea monsters, traders gossiping about hidden treasures. But this woman wasn't making sense. Not from this world, he repeated, his voice laced with disbelief. She nodded. Yes, my name is Era. I'm not human. At least not in the way you understand it. The absurdity of the statement hit Darius like a slap in the face. His mind raced to piece together the jumbled fragments of her words. He was no fool. He knew what people were capable of, knew the tricks they played to hide their identities. But this was different, Era continued, her tone growing more earnest. I'm from a place beyond the stars, beyond the sea. My people. We have powers, abilities that most wouldn't believe. And now, I'm running. Hunted by those who would see my kind destroyed. Darius blinked again, wondering if he had somehow stumbled into the middle of a madman's story. But her eyes, there was no trickery in them, no desperation, just the quiet conviction that what she was saying was the truth. You're telling me you're, what? Some kind of alien? Darius scoffed, not believing a word of it. He had been in this business too long to fall for wild claims. Era's lips twitched as though she had anticipated his disbelief. Not alien. I'm from a different realm. A place that exists outside the confines of time and space as you know it. Darius took a step back, his hand dropping from the sword. His mind struggled to process the information, but it didn't sit right. She wasn't lying. He could see that now. There was no faking the raw honesty in her gaze. And you expect me to believe all of this? He asked, the doubt still evident in his voice. He wasn't sure if he was more perplexed or just plain annoyed. Era nodded slowly. I know it sounds insane. I wouldn't expect you to believe it right away. But you'll see, eventually. The way she said it, calm, certain, shivered down his spine. I'm not in the mood for riddles, lady, he growled. Why the hell should I help you? Why shouldn't I just toss you overboard and be done with it? Era's eyes flickered with something dangerous, something raw. Because they'll come for you, too. If you cast me aside, they'll come for you. You'll be involved whether you want to be or not. Her words hung heavy in the air, and for the first time in years, Darius felt a creeping chill crawl up his spine. He knew fear. He'd felt it before, in the heat of a close escape or when the law was breathing down his neck. But this wasn't fear of the mundane. This was something else, something primal. I've had enemies before, he said, his voice hard, though the unease didn't leave. I've made it this far by being smarter than the ones trying to kill me. I'll deal with whoever's coming for you. Era took a step closer, her eyes narrowing. It's not just someone coming for me. It's them. The ones who wiped out my world. The ones who can bend reality itself to their will. The ones who want you dead because you're carrying me. For the first time, Darius felt a flicker of genuine uncertainty. She wasn't speaking in riddles anymore. She was speaking of something far more dangerous than he'd anticipated. There was power in her words, an undeniable truth. You think I'm just going to buy all this? Darius asked, though his words held less conviction than before. Era's expression softened for the briefest of moments, and something almost resembling pity crossed her face. I don't expect you to. But you'll learn. Soon enough. Darius swallowed, still unsure how to react. He didn't believe in magic. He didn't believe in other realms or whatever she was talking about. But what he did believe in was survival. And for some reason, Era, this strange woman with impossible claims, was now tied to his fate. The decision loomed over him. Throw her overboard, or accept the madness of her words and take the risk. I'll give you a ride to the island, Darius said at last, his voice rough, reluctant. But you're not off the hook. I'm watching you. Era didn't smile, but there was a flicker of something almost like relief in her eyes. Thank you. You won't regret it. Darius didn't believe that, but then again, he didn't believe any of this. Still, as he turned to leave the hold, a nagging feeling wormed its way into his gut, a feeling he couldn't shake. Maybe he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. And maybe, just maybe, he was about to find out exactly how right she had been. The Elysium cut through the waters as night descended, the glow of the setting sun slowly fading into the black expanse of the sea. Darius stood at the helm again, his eyes scanning the horizon as the ship sailed further from the familiar coastlines of the island and into open waters. He had allowed the stowaway, Era, to stay, though he couldn't shake the sense of foreboding that had settled in his chest ever since she stepped onto his ship. It was madness, he thought. What was he even doing? He was a smuggler, not some kind of hero playing at rescuing the world. Yet, something about her had captivated him, in a way he both resented and couldn't deny. It was more than her strange story. It was the way she carried herself, how she seemed to almost glow with an energy he couldn't name. The crew was uneasy, too, though none of them would dare voice it. They had seen Darius make all kinds of deals with all kinds of people, but none like her. And the quiet whispers among them made Darius uneasy, too. Still, as the ship sailed further into the night, something else was bothering him. The sea, usually so steady and rhythmic, had begun to feel restless. The wind was shifting, and the waves were rising higher than they should have been for this time of year. The chill in the air felt more biting than usual. Captain, Marco's deep voice broke through his thoughts. He was standing beside him, his brow furrowed in concern. There's something off about the waters tonight. Darius glanced at his first mate, noting the tension in his usually confident posture. What do you mean? Marco motioned to the horizon, where dark clouds had begun to gather rapidly, swirling in a way that didn't look natural. The wind had picked up, howling in an eerie manner. I've sailed these waters long enough to know when something's wrong. It's like something's coming for us. Darius's gaze followed Marco's. A storm was indeed brewing, but it wasn't a regular storm. The clouds moved too fast, the air too thick. A sense of dread swept over him, the unease in his gut growing by the second. Get the crew ready, Darius ordered, his voice sharp with urgency. We're going to need all hands on deck." The men scrambled to their stations, securing the sails and tying down loose cargo. But Darius knew it was futile. Whatever this was, it was beyond the usual storm. This felt different, darker. Suddenly, from the corner of his eye, he saw a flash of movement on the deck. It was Aira. She was standing by the railing, her gaze fixed on the distance, as though the storm didn't even matter to her. Darius felt his heart skip a beat. He had forgotten about her for a moment, caught up in the rising tension of the storm. His hand went to the sword at his side again, but before he could make his way over to her, she turned to him with a look of calm determination in her eyes. "You need to move the ship. Now." Aira's voice rang clear above the wind. "It's not the storm you need to worry about." Darius didn't respond at first, caught between the fear gnawing at his gut and the anger at the thought of being ordered around by a stowaway. But the moment she spoke those words, the air seemed to crackle with a strange, undeniable energy. There was something in her voice that made him pause, a resonance he couldn't ignore. Before he could process, the storm erupted. The wind howled with a fury that seemed unnatural. The ocean swelled violently beneath them. The ship lurched as a massive wave rose in front of them, threatening to break the vessel in two. "Get below deck," Darius shouted, grabbing Aira's arm and pulling her toward safety. But she shook him off, her eyes burning with intensity as she stared at the violent waters. She stepped to the center of the deck, raising her arms. The wind roared louder as she closed her eyes and whispered something under her breath, her voice soft but powerful. For a moment, everything on the ship seemed to freeze, like the world itself held its breath. Then, with a force that seemed to shake the very air, the storm snapped in response. The wind shifted direction, the massive wave that had been bearing down on them suddenly collapsing in on itself, as if it had never existed. Darius stood frozen, his mouth agape as the sea calmed, the turbulent waters smoothing out like glass. The storm was gone. It was as though the wrath of nature had been extinguished by her mere presence. Aira lowered her arms, her breathing steady as though she hadn't just commanded the forces of nature. She turned slowly to face Darius, her expression unreadable. "Told you," she said softly. For a long moment, Darius could only stare at her, his mind racing to understand what had just happened. He had seen strange things in his life, but nothing like this. No explanation, no reason to justify what he had just witnessed. It was impossible, and yet, there it was, right in front of him. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Behind him, the crew began to gather, watching with wide eyes. Marco was the first to break the silence. What in the God's name did you just do?" His voice was low, full of awe and fear. Aira looked at the crew, her gaze calm but penetrating. "I did what I had to do. The storm wasn't natural. Something else was stirring the waters. Something far worse than just a storm." Darius was still grappling with the weight of her words. He could hardly believe it, but the evidence was right in front of him. The ship was no longer in danger. The waves had calmed, the air had settled, and yet the unease that had plagued him before only grew stronger. "Why didn't you tell us?" Darius finally asked, his voice hoarse. Aira met his gaze with a somber expression. "Because you wouldn't have believed me. None of you would. And frankly, it's not time for that yet." Darius felt his chest tighten. "What does that mean?" She took a deep breath, her eyes distant as she stared out across the water. "There's more coming. A lot more. You've just seen the tip of the iceberg. And when they come, we won't be able to stop them unless you trust me." He was silent for a moment, the weight of the situation crashing down on him. He didn't know what he had gotten himself into, but it was clear now that this wasn't just about smuggling anymore. Whatever was happening, whatever Aira was, had the potential to destroy everything he had worked for. But something inside him stirred. Maybe it was the same thing that had kept him alive all these years. A desire to survive, to outwit the odds, to make it through whatever storms life threw at him. And as much as he didn't want to admit it, he realized that surviving this would mean trusting her. Darius nodded slowly, his voice steadying. All right, we move forward. But you're going to explain everything to me, sooner or later. Aira gave a small, knowing smile. Soon enough, Captain. And as the Elysium sailed on through the now calm waters, Darius couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something far bigger than anything he had ever imagined. Something he wasn't sure he could survive. But he wasn't about to back down now. The days that followed were strange, to say the least. The Elysium sailed on, cutting through the calm waters like a knife through butter. But the tension on board was palpable. The crew moved with an unease that hadn't been there before, casting wary glances at Aira whenever she passed. They'd heard the stories. The whispers about people with strange powers, mystical beings from distant lands. But none of them had ever believed those stories, not until now. Darius, too, had been trying to process everything. He'd given her space for now. He didn't trust easily, and certainly not someone who had just shown him the kind of power that defied all logic. It gnawed at him, the fact that the woman he'd taken aboard was not just a stowaway, but someone with abilities far beyond anything he'd ever encountered. But there was something else, something compelling about her. A quiet, almost resigned strength that made him think she wasn't just a victim of her powers, but someone who had been shaped by them. It was late in the evening, and the ship's deck was bathed in the cool glow of the moon. The crew had settled for the night, and Darius stood alone by the railing, staring into the blackened sea. The calm waters reflected the moonlight, but even that serenity felt deceptive. He knew that it wouldn't last. He had seen enough storms in his life to know that the calm before the chaos could be the deadliest part. A soft footstep behind him pulled Darius from his thoughts. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was. "I thought you might be here." Aira's voice broke the silence, her tone steady and calm, as always. Darius glanced over his shoulder. She was standing just a few paces away, her figure framed by the moonlight. Her presence seemed to change the atmosphere around her, like she was a force of nature herself. "I needed some air," he said gruffly, though he couldn't deny there was a small part of him that wanted her company. There was something comforting about her, even in the midst of the chaos she had brought with her. "You're worried," she observed, her green eyes sharp as ever. "Not just about the storm, but about me. About what I can do." Darius didn't respond immediately. He had spent the last few days carefully avoiding her, unsure of how to approach her without revealing how unsettled he really was. But the truth was, he was curious. And curiosity, no matter how dangerous, always got the better of him. "I don't trust you," he finally said, the words feeling like a confession more than an accusation. Aira's gaze softened, as though she understood. "I don't expect you to. Trust is earned, not given. But you don't have to trust me to know that I'm the only thing standing between you and what's coming." The storm wasn't the only warning. Darius turned to face her fully, his arms crossed over his chest. "And what exactly is coming, then? More storms? More magic tricks?" Aira shook her head slowly. "No, what's coming is far worse. And it's not just about me anymore. It's about everything, about your world and mine. You're in this now, whether you like it or not." Her words, though soft, carried a weight that Darius couldn't ignore. He wanted to dismiss her as just another crazy person with an elaborate story, but deep down, something told him this wasn't just a game. "You've already told me you're not human," Darius said, his voice cutting through the tension between them. "But you still haven't told me why you're here. Why you're on my ship. What do you need from me?" Aira sighed, her gaze distant as she seemed to weigh her next words carefully. "It's hard to explain, but I'll try." She took a small step closer, her voice dropping to a whisper as though sharing a secret. "I'm from a place beyond the known realms. A place where time, space, and reality itself don't function like they do here. My people," she hesitated, "my kind, we've been hunted for centuries. They've come for us, taken our worlds, destroyed everything we've ever known." Darius frowned, confused. "They? Who are they?" Aira met his eyes, her expression hardening. "The Enforcers." "The Enforcers?" Darius repeated, his mind racing to piece it together. What are they? Some kind of army? They're not like anything you can understand. Era's voice was tight now, tinged with a deep bitterness. They are beings who exist to purge those like me, those who are different. They travel between realms, hunting down any world that defies their vision of order. Their mission is simple: eradicate what doesn't conform. We don't even know where they come from, only that they always find us, no matter where we hide. Darius shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't just a story anymore, it was something far more dangerous. And you think they're coming after you? Why? Era's eyes darkened. Because I'm the last of my kind. And because of what I carry. Darius raised an eyebrow. What do you carry? She paused for a long moment, her gaze flicking toward the horizon as though she were considering whether or not to reveal something even deeper. I carry a key, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. A key that can open doors to realms beyond this one. A key to worlds that are untouchable by the enforcers. But in the wrong hands, it could destroy everything. Darius felt his chest tighten. A key? To other realms? The implications of her words were staggering. He had always known that the world was bigger and stranger than he had ever imagined, but this was beyond anything he could have expected. So, you're telling me that if these enforcers get their hands on this key, they could wipe out everything? He asked, his voice steady despite the rising sense of disbelief. Yes, Era answered simply, her expression grave. And they will. They have already destroyed countless worlds. Mine was just the beginning. Darius exhaled slowly, his mind reeling. His life had always been about smuggling, about moving goods and avoiding trouble. But now, trouble had found him, and it was far bigger than anything he could have anticipated. I didn't sign up for this, he muttered under his breath. Era gave him a sad smile. None of us ever do. But you're here now, and whether you like it or not, you're part of this fight. Darius stood there in silence, his eyes scanning the horizon once more. The stars above seemed too distant, too cold, and the sea below felt more ominous than it had before. The world was bigger than he had ever imagined, and now he had a choice: run or face whatever was coming. But as he looked back at Era, standing there with the weight of an entire universe on her shoulders, Darius knew that running wasn't an option. Whatever she was, whatever they were up against, he couldn't turn away now. All right, Darius said, his voice resolute, though his heart was still heavy with doubt. I'm in. But if we're doing this, you'd better start telling me everything. No more secrets. Era nodded, her expression serious. You'll get your answers. But first, we have to survive what's coming. And as the ship sailed on through the night, the air around them grew heavier, as though the sea itself was holding its breath, waiting for someone, to come. The Elysium had been at sea for 2 more days, the calm giving way to a strange sense of anticipation. It wasn't the usual tension that came with the threat of a storm or pirates. This was something different. The crew was on edge, the constant glances toward Era followed by quick, nervous conversations when they thought she wasn't listening. Darius could feel it too. Every creak of the ship, every gust of wind seemed to whisper of something coming, something dark, inevitable. Era had remained as distant as ever, her quiet, contemplative nature only adding to the mystery surrounding her. She spoke little, but Darius noticed how her gaze would sometimes drift toward the horizon, as if she could sense something far off. Her silence, once unnerving, had begun to weigh heavily on him. He wanted to know more, needed to know more. The strange events of the past few days, her stopping the storm, her cryptic warnings, had shattered his sense of the world, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was building, waiting to strike. It was late afternoon when it happened. The first sign of the enforcers came as a flicker in the air, barely noticeable at first. Darius was standing at the helm, watching the crew go about their tasks, when he felt it, a subtle shift in the atmosphere, like the air itself had thickened. He stopped, his hand tightening around the wheel as he scanned the horizon. The sky seemed to have darkened abruptly, as if the sun had been swallowed by an unseen force. Then came the sound. It was faint at first, a low hum like the resonance of a bell vibrating through the air. Darius frowned, his pulse quickening as he tried to place the noise. It wasn't natural. Era was standing at the edge of the deck, her gaze fixed on something in the distance. Her expression was one of quiet determination, but there was a flicker of something more, a deep, gnawing fear in her eyes that sent a shiver down Darius's spine. "They're here," she said, her voice low but firm. Darius's heart raced. "Who? The enforcers?" She nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line. Close. You need to prepare the crew. They'll be here any minute." The humming sound grew louder, now a low, pulsating thrum that seemed to vibrate through the ship itself. Darius turned to shout orders to his crew, but as he did, the air around them seemed to ripple, like the very fabric of reality was being torn apart. A strange distortion hovered in the distance, shimmering in the air like heat rising from the surface of the desert. And then, as if answering some silent command, a shape began to form. At first, it was just a blur, like a shadow moving too quickly, too unnaturally, but then it solidified. A massive, gleaming vessel appeared in the distance, its surface smooth and metallic, reflecting the dull sky in a way that made it appear almost unreal. It hovered above the sea, no sails or oars, just a ship that defied all reason. The Elysium rocked as the vessel came closer, the force of its presence bending the air around them. The crew gasped, their faces pale as they stared at the impossible craft. It was like something from another world. Darius's throat went dry. He had heard tales of ships like this, beasts of metal and strange energies, flying above the water as if the laws of nature didn't apply to them. The enforcers were real. They were here. "We need to move," Era said, her voice sharp now, urgent. "They've already detected us." Darius barely heard her. His eyes were fixed on the ship as it drew nearer, its strange, otherworldly glow making his skin crawl. He had thought himself prepared for anything. He had lived through worse, had faced down countless dangers in his time as a smuggler. But this was different. This was beyond anything he had ever imagined. "How do we fight that?" he whispered, half to himself, though he knew Era could hear him. Era's gaze flickered to him, her expression hardening. We can't, but we can outrun them." "Outrun them?" Darius asked, disbelief thick in his voice. "That thing's flying. We're sitting ducks down here." "Listen to me, Captain," she said, her voice cutting through the panic that was beginning to spread among the crew. "You have to trust me. There's a way to escape, but we need to act fast." Before Darius could respond, the enforcer vessel was right above them. The air crackled with energy, and a beam of intense light shot down from the ship, illuminating the deck of the Elysium. It felt like a weight pressing on his chest, the force of the beam pushing against the ship itself. The crew scrambled, shouting in confusion and fear, but it was too late. The beam surged forward, and before Darius could even react, everything around him was engulfed in a brilliant white light. For a moment, there was nothing but the blinding flash, and then darkness. When Darius came to, he was lying flat on his back. His head was pounding, his body sore, and his ears were ringing. He groaned, pushing himself up, his mind racing as he tried to piece together what had just happened. The last thing he remembered was the blinding light, the beam striking the ship. Slowly, he sat up, squinting against the harsh brightness of the surroundings. It wasn't the deck of the Elysium he saw. The ship was gone, vanished. Instead, he found himself in what looked like some kind of strange, metallic chamber, its walls slick and seamless, glowing with an eerie, cold light. He shot to his feet, panic bubbling up in his chest. "No, no, no, no. Era," he shouted, his voice hoarse. "Era." His heart thudded painfully in his chest as he scrambled to his feet, his gaze darting around the unfamiliar room. There was no sign of the crew, no sign of anyone, except for the faint hum of energy that buzzed in the air. Where were they? What had happened? Then, he saw her. Era was standing near the far wall, her back to him, her hands held out in front of her, as if she were reaching for something that wasn't there. She was silent, her expression unreadable. Darius rushed toward her, his feet sliding on the smooth floor. "Era," he called again, but she didn't move. When he reached her, he grabbed her arm, spinning her around. Her eyes were wide with fear, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of panic in her eyes. "They've taken us," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They've taken us to their ship. And now, it's just begun." Darius felt a chill run down his spine. The enforcers had them, and there was no telling what would happen next. The door to the chamber slid open with a soft hiss, and a figure stepped through. Tall, cloaked in dark, flowing robes, and exuding an aura of power that made the air itself seem to bend in its presence. The figure was still for a moment, observing them with glowing, cold eyes that seemed to pierce through Darius's very soul. "The key has arrived," the figure said, its voice smooth but sharp, like the whisper of a blade through air. Darius's blood ran cold. It was only the beginning. And they were trapped. Darius was still trying to process everything when the figure vanished. The silence that followed was suffocating, the weight of the unknown pressing down on them both. Era stood motionless, her eyes distant, her mind clearly far away, trapped in some tumultuous storm of thoughts. Darius, meanwhile, could barely catch his breath. He'd never dealt with enemies like the enforcers. No smugglers or pirates had ever been this elusive, this strange. They were like shadows, too powerful, too prepared. His thoughts spun back to the figure's final words. The key. It was an object of unimaginable power, and Era had it. He looked at her again, as if trying to understand what she was hiding. The enigmatic woman, so silent and calm, now felt like an enigma wrapped in a mystery far beyond his reach. "Era," he said, his voice low, "what is the key?" She didn't immediately respond, her fingers brushing the walls of the metallic room. Her face was clouded with something Darius couldn't quite place. It wasn't just fear. There was something older, something darker in her eyes. Finally, she turned toward him, her expression hardening. "The key is not just an object. It's part of me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Darius's pulse quickened. "Part of you?" he echoed, disbelief creeping into his voice. "What do you mean? You're telling me you're some kind of weapon? That's what the enforcers want. To control you?" Era shook her head, her eyes sad. "No, they don't just want to control me, Darius. They want to control everything. They want to control all of it. The key, the power that lies within it, and the way it can alter the very fabric of reality itself." Darius felt his head spin. He had thought he'd heard everything, seen everything, but this was far beyond anything he had ever imagined. The enforcers, a force beyond comprehension, were after something that could change the world, or destroy it. "What is the key, then?" he asked, his voice demanding. "Why didn't you tell me?" Era's jaw clenched. "I couldn't, not yet. You wouldn't have believed me." Her gaze softened just a touch, and for the first time, Darius saw something more than the cold, hardened exterior she had built around herself. She was afraid, and for the first time in this entire nightmare, Darius realized just how much danger they were in. "It's a fragment of an ancient force," Era explained slowly, her voice steady but laced with sorrow. "An ancient civilization, long forgotten. Before the enforcers, before anything we know today, they created the key. It was meant to bind the fabric of this universe together, to stabilize time, reality, everything. But over the centuries, the power it held became too dangerous to control. And so, the enforcers have sought to recover it for centuries, wanting to use its power to reshape the world in their image." "And you're, what, a vessel?" Darius asked, his voice trembling with the weight of the revelation. He couldn't comprehend how this quiet, mysterious woman in front of him could hold such power. "Yes," she replied. "I was chosen to carry the key when I was young. It was dormant for most of my life. But recently, it has begun to awaken." Darius felt the ground beneath him shift. This was no longer a fight for survival. It was a race against time, against an unimaginable force. The enforcers weren't just after Era. They were after the destruction or rebirth of everything, and she held the key to it all. There was no more time for questions. The rumbling of the ship's hull seemed to get louder, as though the vessel itself were coming to life. The door behind them slid open with a sharp hiss, and Darius spun around, instinctively reaching for his blade. A figure appeared in the doorway. It was an enforcer, tall, covered in dark armor that shimmered with an eerie light. His eyes glowed a haunting yellow as he stepped forward, his movements precise, controlled. Era, the enforcer's voice was smooth, almost mechanical. You cannot escape your fate. We will take what is ours. Darius tensed, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. They had been found. The enforcers weren't going to stop until they had her. Until they had the key. But Era didn't flinch. Her posture remained calm, almost resigned, as if she had been expecting this moment. She stepped forward, her hand raised, a faint glow beginning to emanate from her fingertips. I won't let you take it, she said, her voice fierce. And I won't let you control me. The enforcer's expression remained impassive as he raised his own hand, a weapon materializing from the air itself, a jagged, dark energy blade, crackling with power. His eyes locked onto Era. You are out of time, child. The ship's core is destabilizing. You cannot stop what is already in motion. Darius's mind raced. He needed to act fast. This was his chance to finally get answers. But there was no time for hesitation. Without thinking, Darius surged forward, his blade raised. He couldn't let Era face this alone, not now. He might not be able to defeat this enforcer, but he had to buy them time. He had to make sure they had a chance to escape. The enforcer didn't even flinch as Darius closed the distance. With a fluid motion, the enforcer swung his energy blade, and Darius barely managed to block the strike, his own blade rattling from the force. You're out of your depth, smuggler, the enforcer hissed. You cannot stop us. Darius gritted his teeth. I'm not trying to stop you. Just trying to survive. Era's hand crackled with energy as she pushed forward, her power surging through the air, a pulse of light that knocked the enforcer off balance. It wasn't enough to defeat him, but it was enough to make him pause. Darius, she called, her voice urgent. We need to go now. Darius didn't hesitate. He grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the door. The ship was rumbling violently now, its systems failing as they made their way down the hall. The enforcer recovered quickly, but they were already too far ahead. Darius's heart raced. They needed to escape. The sound of pursuit echoed behind them. Footsteps, mechanical, heavy, and relentless. But ahead, the way out was clear. Era focused, her hand glowing brightly as she reached for a control panel at the end of the hall. A blast of energy shot from her fingers, hitting the panel and sending a cascade of sparks flying. The door slid open just as the enforcers closed in. Darius didn't look back. He pushed Era through the doorway, stepping in just behind her. The chamber was different from the rest of the ship. There was an odd, pulsating core in the center of the room, surrounded by a strange force field. Era's eyes widened. This is it, the heart of the ship. We can control it from here. Before Darius could respond, the door behind them slammed shut, and the sound of heavy footsteps filled the room. The enforcers were close, too close. Era stepped forward, her hands moving over the console, her fingers glowing with raw energy. The force field around the core began to shimmer and pulse, responding to her touch. We don't have much time, she said, her voice tight with focus. They'll be here any second. Darius turned, ready to fight, but in that moment, he knew the truth. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. This was a battle for the fate of the universe itself. And Era was the one holding the key. The ship, the Elysium, was gone. The crew was nowhere to be found. Darius and Era stood in the silent, sterile chamber, their minds racing, each processing the gravity of what had just transpired. The reality of their situation had settled in, like a heavy stone sinking in the pit of Darius's stomach. They were aboard the Enforcer's ship, a place that had become a labyrinth of unfamiliar, metallic halls that stretched out in every direction. There were no windows, no way to gauge the passage of time or the world beyond. The walls were sleek and curved, emitting a soft, pulsating glow. There was no visible crew, no sign of life, just the oppressive, unnerving silence that permeated every inch of the vessel. Era broke the silence first, her voice steady but tinged with urgency. "We don't have much time. We need to get to the core of this ship, where they keep the power systems. If we can reach it, we can take control of the ship's navigation and get out of here. But it won't be easy. The Enforcers have eyes everywhere." Darius gave her a sharp glance. "And you think I can help you do that?" Era met his gaze without hesitation. "You're not just a smuggler, Darius. You're resourceful. You've survived in a world where people like us don't last long. That's why I need you. Because I can't do this alone." The weight of her words sank in. Era was right. He'd always been able to survive. He'd carved a life for himself in the shadows, dodging authorities, avoiding danger when possible, and using his wits when there was no way out. This situation, however, was on a scale far beyond any smuggling run he had ever been a part of. "All right," he said, his voice resolute. "But if we're doing this, we're doing it my way." Era gave him a small, tight-lipped smile. "I'm not expecting anything less." They moved quickly, their footsteps echoing in the eerily quiet corridors. Era led the way, her steps sure and confident despite the uncertainty surrounding them. As they navigated the ship, Darius couldn't help but feel the weight of their surroundings. The silence was unnatural, almost oppressive. It felt like the very walls of the ship were alive, watching them, waiting for them to make a mistake. As they approached a large, central chamber, the faint hum of energy grew louder, and Darius could feel the air growing denser, heavier. The walls here were adorned with strange symbols and markings, alien to him but undoubtedly significant. It was clear that this ship wasn't just a vessel. It was a fortress, a place of immense power, a place that belonged to beings who existed beyond the boundaries of time and space. They paused before an enormous door, its surface smooth and unyielding. Era's expression darkened as she approached the control panel next to it. "This is it," she said, her voice low. "Behind this door is the heart of the ship. If we can gain access to its control systems, we can escape. But it's not going to be easy." Darius examined the door, his fingers brushing over the sleek surface. He could feel the faint vibrations of the ship's energy running through it. This was no ordinary door. It was a barrier that would take more than just a simple code or hack to bypass. "You know how to open it?" he asked, his tone skeptical. Era nodded, stepping forward. "I can manipulate the ship's systems to some extent, but it will require a concentration of power from me. I'll need a few minutes." Darius surveyed the area around them, his instincts kicking into overdrive. "Then we'd better make sure no one finds us before you're done." He moved into a defensive stance, his hand on the hilt of his blade. He had no illusions about their situation. They were on the Enforcer's turf now, and the chances of walking out of this without a fight were slim. Era closed her eyes, her breathing steady as she began to focus on the control panel. The air around them seemed to shift, growing heavier with energy, and Darius could feel the tension in the air. Every moment was a countdown. He scanned the hallway behind them, every sense alert for any sign of movement. Then it came. Shifting shadows in the distance, a faint hum of energy. He spun around, his pulse quickening as he saw them emerge. 3 Enforcers. They moved with unnerving precision, their forms sleek and impossibly graceful. The way they walked, glided, suggested that they weren't entirely human. Their eyes glowed a sickly yellow, and their skin seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly sheen. They didn't speak, but their presence alone was enough to send a chill down Darius's spine. Darius's hand instinctively went to his blade, but Era was already moving. Her voice rang out in the stillness. "Get back," she snapped, her words sharp and commanding. Before Darius could react, a blast of energy shot from her hands, crackling with pure, raw power. It collided with the nearest enforcer, sending it stumbling backward, its armor flickering with a burst of light. The other two enforcers reacted instantly, their movements fluid and predatory as they raised their arms, energy surging from their fingertips. Darius didn't wait for the fight to escalate. With a swift motion, he unsheathed his blade and charged. The first enforcer that had been hit by Aera's blast was still recovering, and Darius was on him in an instant, his blade slicing through the air. But as the sword made contact with the enforcer's armor, it bounced off with a sickening clang, the metal gleaming unnaturally. Darius cursed under his breath. The armor was tougher than steel, and the enforcer was already recovering. Aera, meanwhile, was holding off the other two. Her hands glowed with an intense, blinding light as she threw bursts of energy at them. The enforcers, however, seemed almost impervious to the blasts, dodging and countering with frightening speed. Darius gritted his teeth, frustration building. He couldn't fight them head-on, not without a weapon that could penetrate their armor. But he had to do something. His eyes darted around, landing on a control panel embedded in the wall beside him. His instincts flared. He had no idea what it did, but if it was part of the ship, it might be useful. He sprinted toward it, slamming his fist against the surface. Lights flickered, and the panel beeped loudly, its interface flashing erratically. "What are you doing?" Aera shouted, her voice strained as she fought off the enforcers. "Trying to buy us some time," Darius shouted back, furiously pressing buttons at random. The lights flickered once more, and then the room shook, the hum of energy in the air growing louder. A loud, mechanical whine filled the air, and suddenly, the floor beneath them shifted, opening up into a massive chamber below. Darius barely had time to react as the enforcers, distracted by the sudden shift in the ship's power, staggered for a split second. "Now!" Darius yelled, grabbing Aera by the arm and pulling her toward the open pit. They jumped. As they fell into the darkness below, Darius's thoughts raced. They had made their move, but would it be enough to escape the enforcers, or had they just sealed their fate? And in that moment, he realized that there was no going back. They were falling into the heart of the storm.